So, can anybody hear me over the music? I'm just testing the speaker to start. So let's see what we got for time here. Might as well start early. So today we're going to continue what we were talking about on Monday with the steppers. Apparently I got it working like an hour later. The directions may be slightly different, but I'll let you know what those are. But it seems to work with the same setup process as the SKR. So I'm going to back out of some of this stuff and just show you what we have. So I'm going to pop this off, and we know that the jumper goes right here. for UART. It's the third set of pins down on the left-hand side. We have to be in 3.3 volts for our jumper over here, and everything else should be normal. Then we know about the actual pins and the orientation. So I'm going to insert this back in, and then I'm going to set up a fresh copy of Marlin to work with, just in case. I left the power in from the other night. So before I start, does anybody have any questions? Want to say hello? Thanks, Bob. So what we need to do is actually set up in Marlin. So I have to check my Marlin, or excuse me, my VS Code. Make sure I'm all set up here before I actually show you. So I'm going to go over and first clean things up real quick. So I'm basically unzipping a new version of Marlin so that we're starting from scratch. And I just didn't want to show you. And we're going to be actually using the TMC2209 by MKS to start. And I'll show you what I'm doing in just 2 seconds here. I just want to get it unzipped. And obviously zipping or unzipping files is not the quickest thing on this computer yet. So I'm going to bring us over to VS Code. So inside VS Code, we're going to basically go over and do what we did last night and then see if it works. If not, I'll show you the trick that I figured out. So we're going to open a folder. We're going to go to the Downloads folder, Marlin, Marlin again, select folder. Inside here, we're going to go to the Marlin subfolder here, source, core, boards.h. Then we're going to search on MKS underscore sGen underscore L underscore V2. And notice the chipset for the default environment, and we're going to copy this. So I'm going to minimize this source. I'm going to go to configuration.h. I'm going to search on motherboard. I'm going to replace the default motherboard for the ramps. I'm going to change this to -1. Then I'm going to change the stepper by searching on A4988. I'm going to remove the comment for the X stepper, or excuse me, X driver type. And then I'm going to go over here and copy the TMC2209 and paste it here. Now, earlier today, somebody asked about standalone. You don't want to use that unless you want to keep your chip in one particular configuration. That's where you have to flash it. So you can't undo that configuration as far as I know yet. So you always want to use this one for UART. And so the UART chip, you have to be careful when you order. You have to make sure that it specifies UART. So now that we have that set, I'm also going to talk about something else that came up. Over here, originally I talked about the RepRap calculator. Now there's some issues with the RepRap calculator, and that has to do with the number of teeth that are on a particular part. That can vary this number between 100 and 80. But in this case, when we probably calibrate this, we may have to change the calibration. But maybe I'll go through that tonight if we have time. But we're going to stick with 80, but I'm going to do something different. First, I'm going to load it normally. Then we'll go back and modify it. And you probably won't see a difference, but at least you'll understand that they're proportional to what's occurring on the advanced configuration tab. But first I've got to set the invert. So I'm going to do that real quick. So we need to invert the logic right here from false to true. And here's where it may vary. If it breaks when I do this, we'll change it. But there's the EEPROM. So if you search on EEPROM, we may need to remove this comment. First time through, I'm not going to do it because I want to see what happens. But EEPROM is available, I believe, on this board, so it is usable. But for the moment, I want to avoid it. And that's just rewritable memory. It's more static than RAM because it's preserved between reboots. And the old EEPROM that probably no one knows what it is used to be reset with just UV light. So you'd shine a light on it and erase it. In this case, you don't have to do that anymore. It's a more modern version of it. But I just wanted to give you a small history lesson on EEPROM. So the next thing that we need to do is go over to the configuration advanced.h. Inside configuration advanced.h, we're going to first search on 800. So I'm going to get down to it in just 2 seconds. And we're not going to change this just yet. This is the one that's going to be proportional to the, let me see if I can find it real quick. It's like steps per, might have to add a space here. There we go. So default access steps per unit. If you double this from 80 to 160, you have to proportionally double this. So this would be 32. So if you go to 320 from 160, you're going to have to go to the doubling value here of 64 so they match. That's for microstepping. Now 256 and even 128 may be a little too high for this chip, but you can try that on your own time. But for now, I'm just going to change this back to 16 and 80 to see if it works. Then I'm going to go over here, and there's another instruction that they said to do that makes me nervous because I don't think it really applies. But they're saying after you've configured sensorless homing that you want to configure, let me look at my notes here. You want to configure, let's see, where is it? Hybrid threshold. I'm going to avoid that the first time through. If it doesn't work, we'll go through each one. So we're just going to do sensorless homing from now, or for the moment. So I'm going to remove the comment to enable it. And because this is default for SPI communications, we're going to use the TMC2209. And their recommended value is 125. I prefer 120, but that's something you can play with. But that's about midpoint between highest sensitivity and the lowest. So these are both extremes. Like if you move at 255, it may stall and stop just because of the vibration. And in this one, it'll just keep grinding on the end of the axis, or axi, excuse me. Basically the x-axis in this case. So those are the only things I'm going to modify. There was one other thing they said to do for 12 volt power, but I think it's already enabled. So let me just see if I can find that one here in my notes. I probably don't have it, but I can always look it up. It was something about changing the voltage for power supply for 12 volts. I'm not sure which tab it's on off the top of my head, but I'm guessing it's configuration.h. Let's see if I can find it. So I'm searching on 12 volts, not seeing it. So it's not there, or probably not there. And then over here, let's see if we can find it again. So there's a couple different places where they talk about 12. But I don't see the actual setting right now. So we'll worry about that in a minute. Whoop, I may have just passed it. Here it is. This is already enabled. This might not be the right setting. I might be wrong on this. I thought I had something to do with the power supply, but it turned out not to be commented out, and it was there by default. So we're going to ignore that for now. So I'm going to just set up platform.io.ini, and the LPC 1768, or excuse me, 69 was the group that we took it from. And I'll show you the cheat sheet again on how I did that. So it's source, core, boards.h. It's the value right here. So I'm going to minimize this, and I'm going to do a clean first. Then I'm going to go over to the actual board, and I'm going to plug it in with USB. So I'm going to plug this in, and I'm going to plug in the power later just to see if we can load the firmware. If it doesn't work, at least we'll know, but I'll show you what's going on with the drive. So right here's the drive. Right now it's the firmware from last night at 7:41 p.m. That's when I got curious. So I'm going to go back to VS Code and compile this, and then I'll check on the chat in 2 seconds. So I'm going to click the upload button, which I've said compiles and then uploads. Build basically means a lot of compiles. So there's individual things that are building. Or all of them, excuse me. So let me look at the chat real quick. Let's see what we got. Yeah, the audio, I've been working on that. I don't disconnect the power anymore from the USB hub. I just leave it. Let's see. TMC2100s, I've never actually used. I might have some here, but they might be buried someplace in a drawer. TMC2209s, I'm rather impressed with them. Originally it was SPI for TMC2130s that I liked, but this is definitely more comfortable for me. Let's see. Yeah, I don't know what, almost thinking of doing a load cell homing. I'm not exactly sure what that process is. Yeah, hello to everybody that I haven't said hello to. Unfortunately, I have a huge time like trying to pronounce these interesting usernames. I think it's free something. Sorry, I started a little late today. We had a bit of a snowstorm. It's only like 6 inches of snow, but it kind of slowed things down today. Okay, so let me go back and check on the build because I'm kind of ignoring it here, trying to read all the chats. So I'm gonna go over to, whoop, sorry, let me transition. The build was successful, and then I'll go back to the desktop so you can see it, which you already saw, but the firmware.bin is there. So I'm gonna go over to the workbench, and I'm gonna unplug the power for the USB. Wait a couple seconds, and then plug it back in. And then I'm going to see if it loads by going over to my computer's desktop. And as you can see, it just loaded. So we know in theory it loaded. So I'm going to go back. Whoops, sorry. In theory, we know it loaded, as we can see right here. Let me go back to the workbench and plug it in. And in theory, this should work. So let me show you the desktop here. I just plugged it in. So I'm going to go to Pronterface and bring that up. Inside Pronterface, I may have to check the actual device manager to verify what I've got. So I'll show you what that looks like again. So in the device manager, if you don't know what your USB is, it's probably that, because this is actually static to the computer and it's usually a serial port or a DB9 type port. So 9 pins. This is usually your USB serial. So if it's changed, we can modify it, but I think it's still the same. Whoop, I didn't show you, sorry. Over here is what I'm talking about. That's probably our port. And then this one would be the actual one on the back of the computer that's DB9 of some type, either male or female, I don't remember. So I'm gonna go back over to Pronterface, and we're gonna test out if this works. So I'm gonna connect to the printer. Let's check on the actual stepper to see if it's stable. So M122 and then press enter. And right now it says okay. I forgot to turn on debug, which is probably a step you may or may not want to do. But let's try moving the axis 100 steps and seeing if it works. So it's moving a little bit more than 100 steps. I'll show you how to solve that in a second. But we're going to home the axis. And apparently it's not working. So we're going to go back in and make some changes. So the first one I'm going to try is their suggestion for... Sorry, I got to look at my notes again. Hybrid threshold and see if that fixes it. So I'm going to disconnect even though it failed. And I'm going to de-energize the system. And we'll try it again. So it's always funny when I'm showing you, it actually seems to work when I'm not showing anyone. And of course I didn't show you, so basically I moved it over and homing got stuck. I keep forgetting to hit transition. Let me turn it off for studio mode, that way I won't be on the wrong screen. So I'm going to go over to VS Code again and go to the Advanced tab. We're going to see first if hybrid has an effect on it. If it doesn't, then we'll go back in and recompile again. But I'm going to search first on this hybrid threshold. So I'm on the Configuration Advanced tab. And I'm going to say hybrid. And we'll first remove the comment. This is not true for the SKR version, so I don't know why they're doing it, but this allows for stuff up here that you can check out on your own time. But I'm going to rebuild this, and then we'll check to see what it looks like on the desktop. So I'm going to flash over to the desktop so you can see what I'm talking about. So right now, the build doesn't have anything there. It should only take a couple seconds, so I'm going to go back over to VS Code. And right now it's still building, so I'm going to check on the chat real quick. Yeah, I keep having issues with the wrong screen. I keep putting it in studio mode and thinking I'm hitting the button, then I go and talk, and then I realize I'm on the wrong thing. So I turned off studio mode because it usually fails on me anyways. So back in here, it looks like the build is not working. So let's figure out what's going on because it looks like it failed. So right here, the actual upload is not occurring, and I'll show you why. So on the desktop, it hasn't come in yet. So first I'm going to check the power. Power's fine. So what I'm going to do is go over my desktop for a second. And I'm actually just going to disconnect this, then reconnect it. And then I'm going to go back over to VS Code. But let me show you the desktop real quick for the pop-up. This is actually the firmware. So now I'm going to go back into VS Code, and this should actually instantaneously update. So it causes it to terminate when you disconnect the USB. The connection may have been held by another software, being possibly Pronterface. But this should solve it. So let's go check to see what that looks like. So on the desktop, it did load. So I'm going to go back to the workbench. I'm going to disconnect the power again for the USB and reconnect it. And then I'm going to double check the desktop and see what it looks like. So as you can see on the desktop, it says it just loaded, or at least I hope it did. Let's check the time. Yeah, it's about a minute ago. So I'm going to go back to Pronterface. I'm going to plug this back in. And then we're going to see if we can connect to it. And this time I'm just going to try and see if I can home. So that's not a real good feeling. So it's not moving at all. So it's a little nerve-wracking, but what I'm going to do is power down the entire setup for a second. So I'm just going to take the power out. Then I'm going to take the USB serial out. Hit the reset button just in case. Plug it back in. And then plug in the power and see if this makes anything better. It probably won't. So I'm going to connect, see if it moves. So it moves a little, so I'll try home. Looks like home's about to fail. So I'm going to disconnect again. Then I'm going to go over to VS Code and make another change. So in VS Code, we know that this comment's removed, so the only other things that we have to look at, I can do the debugs, but we're going to go to EEPROM instead and see if this fixes it. It's really weird, these instructions that they gave, but we're running out of things to check here because I got this working last night, was surprised, and now it's not. So EEPROM is the last thing. I may have to double check a couple things, but I'm running out of things to check. Sorry, I'm reading through my notes just to make sure. Okay, let's check on the build. So it failed again. So I'm going to power everything down on the desktop. So I'm just taking the power out. There seems to be some kind of issue with USB communication. And it may be related to Pronterface, but I'm not sure yet. There is a way to check. I just, it takes a little bit more test tools that I don't have on me. Like a logic analyzer might be allowed to see the actual movement of data or something else in between. So I'm going to move over and check the desktop real quick. So it looks like it loaded. So I'm going to disconnect it again. Then I'm going to reconnect it as soon as I go back to the desktop. I'm going to try and power it back up. And then we'll see if it works. So I'm going to connect to it in Pronterface. And let's see what our movement looks like here. 10. That works. Let's try homing. So for some odd reason you need EEPROM, I'm guessing. You might not need the hybrid threshold, but we can check that by actually disabling it. But it looks like it's moving. And moving consistently. So if I move it here, it actually moves the correct distance too for 200 or approximately therein. But when you home it, it works. So super weird. Don't know why that was the other night, but on the SKR, you apparently can't or don't need EEPROM, but you could use it as well. So my understanding of the install was not fully correct, but now at least we have a better idea of what's happening. So I'm going to run some quick experiments and then we'll try something else in a second. Let me check on the chat though. Which threshold are you talking about? Are you talking about the 800 to 750? Or let me pull it up so we both can see what I'm talking about. So in the advanced configuration, if you search on 800, Is this what you're talking about for reducing the X current? Yeah, the sensitivity, I think, is what you're trying to say, is what's causing an issue. Oh, you're talking about the actual sensorless homing. So let me bring it over there. So last night I think I may have said 120, but right now there's a slight hissing sound, so we can either go a little bit higher or a little bit lower for sensitivity. So sensorless homing, which value do you want me to try? Do you want 125 or do you want a higher value or lower value? We can see what happens. So I'm going to move it up to 135 and see what happens. And maybe I'll do 0 just so you can see what happens as well, but it makes a lot of noise. So 135. And then you can upload, and hopefully I'll disconnect from Pronterface before this actually fails. And then we'll see if that was the issue. It may have been that we had a crash in the actual board that put us in a funky condition. That's why the firmware wouldn't load, which may bear out with just this happening. So I'm going to go over to the desktop and see if it's there. It is. So on the workbench, to do this, we're going to power it down. I'm going to take out the power, give it a second, then I can touch this, give it a couple more seconds, plug it back in, give it a few seconds to load, which is happening over here, where the flashing lights are showing it happening there. Pardon me. Now I'm going to plug it back in, and we'll see if anything changes with sensitivity. So inside Pronterface, we're going to connect, and then we're going to move ahead 100. So that does change something here, which is odd, but there seems to be something else going on here. So there might be something actually causing this to fail that I don't know about. It's very interesting, but we're going to power everything down and see if we can clear it. So it may not be the EEPROM that's actually the issue. So I'm actually going to close out of some of this stuff in a second. Let me just bring you to the desktop as soon as I power everything down. But there's some kind of issue occurring, and it's a stability issue of some type, because changing the sensitivity shouldn't affect things that much. So let's power it back up and just see what happens. I'm going to close Pronterface for a moment and leave you on the screen so I can clear out any possible errors there. So I'll have it back up in a second. I just have to find it. And if this fails again, we'll try moving the sensitivity back to 125 and seeing if that's the issue. So let me just double check that I got this set up. No, I got to bring up, oh, there it goes. So inside Pronterface, I'm going to connect. Oh, I got to bring the screen over for me. I'm going to connect. It defaults to our setting. I'm actually just going to try and home and see what happens. So homing appears not to be stable. So maybe we can move that actual sensitivity back. So I'm going to go back to VS Code and undo those changes. But this is very, the stability we'll say is different from the SKR. So inside VS Code, all we're going to do is undo our changes. And then we're going to reload. But let me make sure everything's disconnected. So this may have trouble loading, but we'll see in a second. So there's the recompile. Excuse me. So as soon as this is done, this is what I'm actually concerned about. It's showing up right here. So let's see what VS Code has to say. It's stuck again. So power everything down. Plug it back in. Reload it again. So that should solve the issue. Now I'm going to bring you over to the desktop while I power cycle yet again. So I'm going to take the USB out, plug it back in, give it a second. Then I'm going to, sorry, I had you on the wrong screen. I'm going to power it back up. I already removed this and then reinserted it. And we'll see what's going on. This might be why they designed the SKR with separate power sources. I am unsure, but there's definitely some kind of issue going on. So if we go over to Pronterface, let's connect to the device. Let's move it a couple millimeters and then try and home it. So there's definitely something weird going on. I've never actually seen something so oddly unstable. So it may be that I'm missing something simple. So let me check on the power supply issue. Let's go over to their website. The only other thing I can think of. So on their website, there was something that they were talking about. So the MKS, go to the wiki, TMC2209, and there was something about power down here someplace. The ref value we checked last night, apparently I was doing it right. I was just using or confusing myself. Let's see, EEPROM settings. The X driver, we did that. We're at 800. 16. Hybrid threshold. Configure hybrid threshold speed to 100. It's already there. And then it says something about you must use 12-volt power supply, not just USB power supply. Otherwise, the TMC reports an error. So doing this from the screen might make it more stable, but they're talking about how to use a screen here, which is of no value to us. We have the hardware set up right. We have the jumper in place, unless the jumper is broken, and I can change it. We've already set that. This is probably what we need to find, but it's already set. I'm going to copy this, and then we'll go in. It says 125 down here. And we have sensorless homing. So essentially we hit everything they're talking about, unless you can see something I missed. So let's check this real quick. I'm going to go over to VS Code and check this. So it's already enabled. So I'm a little confused. Maybe it needs to cool down. I mean, I can turn on debugging. That's about the only thing I can think of. Try doing that. This is not really how you want to run your board in debug. So here we go. And let me make sure I'm disconnected in front or face, which probably is. But in a funky state, as we know. So I'm going to power everything down, then compile. I'm going to power it up first. Then I'm going to do this. I'm trying to vary the pattern of what I'm doing to see if maybe there's something I'm missing. So I'm going to go over to VS Code, send it again, and then I'm going to power it down in reverse and see what happens. I don't think this is going to change anything, but at this point, there's something very different going on. So, whoop, I didn't even show you what I was doing. I actually just recompiled right here. And now I'm going to check over here, and it loaded. So I'm going to power it down first by pulling the USB. And then the power. Now it could be something as simple as a bad hard drive, meaning the SD card. Or they could have something fundamentally off in their directions, or I could have a bad component. I can switch to a different board. I have 2 of these, but let's see what happens. So this is where I am at right at the moment. I'm going to go over to Pronterface. I'm going to plug in first the power this time. Then I'm going to plug in the USB serial. And then I'm going to check things in here by doing connect. Then I'm going to say M122. It's saying okay. So let's check to see what happens. So it's moving. Now it's home. So now it's working again. Very curious. It might have to do with something odd going on. It maybe have to do with the power supply, but we can try and recreate the error again. But as you can see, I'm totally befuddled as to why it's not working consistently. So I'm going to disconnect. I'm going to go over and build it again. I'm just going to disable these. It shouldn't make a difference, because as you've seen, it's rather confusing. And I'm going to disable this, because we already know it's connected correctly. So I'm going to do another upload. I'm going to try the power the same way that I did it before. I'm going to pull the USB, pull the power, plug in the power, plug in the USB, and see if that fixes it. But I'm going to have to check over on the desktop to see what the status is real quick. So all I did is I went into VS Code and modified something. I'm sorry, I forgot to swatch or swip. I can't even talk right now. Swap the screen. But we have a new build that just came out. So let's go back to the bench. On the bench, I'm going to take out the USB power first. Then I'm going to take out the wall socket power. Then I'm going to plug in the power. Give it a few moments. I'm watching this light over here. And now plug in the USB. Now we'll go back over to Pronterface and see what happens. So I'm going to move 100. And I'm guessing it's going to be functional again. I'm wondering if it's the order at which I'm moving things. So it may be that you're supposed to disconnect the USB before the regular power, but this theory just seems like a theory. So I'm going to check on the chat in a second and see if you're interested in me trying to troubleshoot it further. Yeah, for the SKR, there's a power jumper that either puts you on direct power, where you can connect via the USB, or you can connect to USB power. And this one, they're both powered together, so it's either one or the other. So I'm going to try one more thing, see if there's something else going on. I'm going to disable the EEPROM and see if it makes a difference. I think they were probably running into a similar issue and they thought this fixed it. So let's see if we can figure that out. I think it's just the order at which we power down on this that's causing the issue. So I'm going to go over to VS Code. And I'm going to search on hybrid threshold. And I'm going to comment this back out. And I'm going to compile in a second, but I just want to check on the desktop. And it looks like it's good. So I'm going to go back to VS Code. And I'm going to compile, and then I'll check on the chat in a second. I'm actually doing a build, pardon me. So there are calibration things that I wanted to show you, like the microstepping. Maybe we can play around with that and hopefully break this again. But let me check to make sure I'm disconnected. I forgot to disconnect, and I timed it just right. So inside here it loaded. So first step is, in this case, disconnect the power then the USB, or was it the USB and then the power? So I'm going to go with the USB. Then I'm going to go with power. And I'll show you what I'm doing, sorry. So I've already pulled the USB, I just pulled the power. There's capacitance still going in. Now it looks like it's cleared. So I'm going to hook up the power first. Then I'm going to wait a few seconds for the flashing lights to stop, being these. And now I'm going to plug this in. Let's go back and see if it actually works. So inside here, I'm going to connect. I'm going to move 100. Then I'm going to home. So I'm getting the weird feeling it might be the order at which we power down the system. So what I'm going to try next is taking out the EEPROM. And I'm also going to start playing with the microstepping. So I'm going to disconnect here. I know this is kind of boring, but it's kind of interesting that there's an issue that we can't see. So inside VS Code, we'll search on EEPROM. It is right here. We'll change that. We're going to do one more load, then I'll play with the microstepping because I don't think anything is involved with this. So I'm going to do an upload. The build's pretty quick. Hopefully it will push right over to it. If not, then we'll fix that. But let me look in the chat. Anybody have any other questions while I try and troubleshoot this? I know it's like watching paint dry. So we know it's just finished. Check on the actual drive. That looks good. So we're going to go back to the desktop. And I guess it was USB first. Then it's direct power. then it's waiting. Give it a few seconds, then it's back to direct power. Watch the flashing lights. Then connect the USB. And then let's go over and see if it works still. Okay. And inside prunter face, we'll connect. We'll move 100. Looks like it's moving right. Then we'll go back. So I'm really starting to think it's the USB order in which you have to boot it. So pulling the USB first, then the power, then connecting the power, then the USB. That's my theory. But we'll move on to doing microsteps real quick. So I'm going to disconnect and go back over to VS Code, and we'll try out microstepping real quick, and then I'll try a different board, and hopefully that'll be the same. So inside here, this is what I was talking about earlier. If you go here and you search on, what is it, 80, comma space 80. Let's try cranking this up to 320. It should move the same amount of distance, but there's more microsteps. So if we search on 800 here, it'll bring us back over here. So we did, I think, 320 over here. So it's 4 times. So it's 64. And then we're going to load it with an upload. And then maybe I'll jump to 256 and see if it works. I've never done 256. But that means 2 doubles again. So this will be 120, 256. And on the other side, it'll be, what is it, 320 times 2, so 640, and then 12 something. 1280, I think is what it is. So let's go back over to the desktop, because you pretty much know that the build is loaded, so it's stable over here. So on the workbench, first the USB. Then the power. Give it a few seconds to discharge. Plug in the power. Give it a few seconds over here to load. Okay. Then USB. And then we'll go over to prunter face and see what's going on. So we're connected. Let me make sure you're seeing this and you're not. So inside here, I just connected. I'm just going to move 100. So it moves the same distance, but there's more microsteps. Now I'm going to home. This may be off. This might have to do with sensitivity changing. But apparently it doesn't seem that way. So let's try doubling it one more time, or tripling it, or bring it to 256 and seeing if it works. So I'm going to go over and first go over to VS Code. Inside VS Code, I'm going to take this value and say 256. And then I'm going to go to the home of configuration.h. It would be 640, and then you have to double that, so it's 1280. And so I'm going to load it again. So I'll click here, and I'll check on the chat. Why don't I use the reset button? I'm kind of lazy and I like to drain the system of power. The reset button probably would work, but I prefer trying not to touch the board as much as humanly possible. That's why I try and pull things out on areas I know are non-conductive. But technically this would be in a case normally. I have it kind of glued to the board, being the wood. So let me check on the build real quick here. It looks like it's successful. I'll check it real quick on the desktop. Looks like it's good there, so we'll go to the workbench. And on the workbench, I'm gonna pull this out. Then I'm gonna pull out the power, let it discharge over here. Then I'm gonna plug back in the power. Give it a few seconds. We'll try the reset some other time though. We'll watch this flashing light. Looks like it's done, so I'll plug this in. And we'll try this one last time, and then I'm gonna try something different. So I'm gonna connect, and I'll show you what I'm doing. So all I did was click the connect button to start. Now I'm gonna move it 100. Now I'm gonna move it back. So we know microstepping works at the highest value. I don't know how it's going to react during a print, but that's how you actually set the highest amount of microsteps. And then if you wanted to actually tune this, there's a way to do this. I'll show you a quick process and how it works for me. So if we home this, I'm going to put a mark on this. Hopefully these will rub off. They've been known to get there permanently, so I'll try this one. So on here, I'm gonna power down the system for a minute because I'm reaching over it. So I'm taking out the direct power. Then I'm taking out the regular power. I'll see what screen I'm on here real quick. So what we're gonna do, all we're gonna do is make a line approximately perpendicular to this axis. So we'll say we're starting there. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to plug everything back in. So first the power, I guess. Wait for it to stop doing whatever it's doing. And then I'm going to plug this in. And we're going to go back over to Pronterface for a second. And inside Pronterface, I'm going to first disconnect, reconnect. Then I'm going to move 100. Now I'm going to power down the system for a second. I'm going to take out the actual USB 2 just in case, because that seems to be kind of the process. Try and guide myself a little. These are just approximations. A string usually works better, but you can also use a ruler. So now that that's done, we're going to move this over. And I'm going to take out a ruler as soon as I find one. And we're going to measure. So I've got to put it on millimeters and hopefully not knock over stuff on my desk. And so as you can see, it's moving about, what is it, 80 millimeters? We're just doing an approximation. So we know that that's not very accurate. It should move 100 millimeters. What I'm going to do is I'm going to modify something in here. So I'm going to power this back up in a second. So I'm going to stick the power in. I'm going to reconnect. I'm doing it backwards apparently, which is horrible. But at the moment, we'll find out if there's an issue that pops up. So I'm going to go back over the VS Code. And I'm probably going to bring up a calculator to show you what I'm doing. So inside VS Code, right now it's set to 80. So it's no longer 80 for this, but this essentially is the same. So what we're going to do is we're going to try and extrapolate what's going on. So 1280 is going to be our number. So I'm going to bring up a calculator so you can see what I'm doing. So the calculator, I'll show you in 2 seconds. So on the calculator, was that 1280, and it moved an actual distance of 80 millimeters instead of 100. So we're going to divide by 80, and then we're going to multiply by 100. And in theory, that's our new value. Otherwise, this is a huge mistake. It might be the opposite direction, but let's see what happens. So if I go over to VS Code, I'm going to change this to 1600. I know that sounds odd, very odd. And then I'm going to upload again. Now, hopefully we won't run into other issues, but let's see what happens. So this is your actual, or I'm sorry, this is your estimated, and the other value that we measured is your actual, so it's estimated divided by actual times 100. So let's go over and see if the actual firmware loaded. And apparently I think I've narrowed down what the bug is, which hopefully is the case. So on the desktop, notice how it didn't load. So let's try refreshing it. It did load. So apparently I'm wrong, but that's okay. First I'm going to disconnect the actual USB. Then I'm going to pull the power. Then I'm going to reinsert the power. And then we'll wait for this to catch up. And then I'm going to plug this back in. And we'll test it again in Pronterface. So I'm going to connect. I'm going to home. We're going to start with the same starting point because it's pretty close. And this time we're going to move 100 again. And then we're going to measure. I'm guessing it's going to be slightly better, but I could be wrong. Obviously, my measurements might be off too. So approximately right there. I'm going to power down the system. I'll make the screen bigger so you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to take this out. And then I'm going to move this over. So it's the second hash mark now. So the reason I'm doing such large estimates is to get an idea of where it is. So as you can see, it's almost dead on 100. That's the process you want to use for your X, Y, Z, and your extruder. It's the same concept, but you could use the extruder. You can move it 20 multiplied by 5. And that'll get you close enough for your actual. But it's a very simple process. A lot of people make it more complex than it is. And then after you've done that, where you get all your axi the way you want them, you're then going to do a 20 millimeter cube, measure that, and then you can basically make it more precise. With the same method, you're just going to take the 20 millimeter cube, multiply it by 100 for your values that you get for measurements, and do the same math. But after a couple of iterations, you reach diminishing returns, so it's not real helpful. So I'm going to move on to trying the other board that I was going to try last night, now that we have an idea of what the process is. So let me make sure the system's de-energized, and I'll try that. Looks like it's de-energized. So the plug is out, and the plug is out. I'm going to pop out that one and that one. And like I said before, I use ferrule connectors. This keeps the wire fray from touching each other if you accidentally push these in. I'll put an Amazon affiliate link in the description. And just so people know, no one's paying me or sponsoring me to do this tutorial. But I do have to say that MakerBase did provide me with the MKS sGen L version 2.0. And they also provided me with the TMC2209. So I'm going to move over to the other manual, and I'm going to bring it up for you while I clean up the mess that I made on my counter for this. And I'm going to search for the other board. So we're looking for the other version of this, which is, let me see if you're seeing what I'm seeing. Okay. So I'm going to go to MKS. I'm going to go to repositories. I'm going to search on MKS sGen L, and I'm going to pick the other one. This is the sGen L, it's not the Gen L. And we're going to go and try and wire it the same. But now I got to find the actual manual. I think there is a manual for this one, but I could be wrong. So hardware, MKS, I don't see it there. So I'll go back to Gen L. Datasheet's probably the chipset. That's probably the chipset. So datasheet, yeah, they make this kind of confusing for me. I don't know if they do it by design, but it definitely makes things confusing. Let's check out the file in Chinese. Maybe this will be helpful. So it looks like they made a manual in Chinese. We might be able to decipher what they're saying, or you're going to watch me blow a board up. So they're talking about how to connect, how to set up platform I/O. They're talking about how to load. So it's going to take me a second to go through this. They actually have a manual though, which is kind of surprising. Talking more about firmware. This may not be helpful for us. So they do talk about LCDs a little bit too much. 3D touch. How to configure it. EEPROM settings. Scepter, so we're in the neighborhood. So 2130. That's chip select, I think is what they're talking about. Sensorless homing, 2130. Here we go, UART. That's what we're interested in. We're interested in the pins. So there they are. So I'm going to clean this up for a second and pull out the other one. If you can read Chinese and tell me if there's anything I'm missing there. We're going to see if the TMC2209 works here. Just have to clean up the desktop because I put a special material down so the boards don't move all over the place. Takes me a second to pick it off the board. That and it likes to melt on. Okay, that's clean. Let me find a board. The MKS sGen L one. you haven't figured it out, I've got a very large repository of boards here that I have to go. Five might be in a different drawer. Normally I can find these pretty quick, unless I buried it. Well, maybe we'll try the other MKS, because it's similar. This is actually the Gen L. It's not the sGen L. I can't seem to find the board at the moment. Normally it's here. It might be in the other room. We just check around one more time. And the messed up thing is usually I have two of these boards on hand. Or I may put in another bin. But either way, maybe we can try this board out and hopefully not smoke it. Gotta just move some stuff for. Oh, I know where it is. That's the printer upgrade I did 2 weeks ago. It's still in the printer. So I'll bring up the board so you can see what I'm doing. Gotta make sure that the camera's still active, so just resetting the timer. So we're gonna use this chip. Now it says to set the jumper just the same way as the MKS. So that jumper is located either here, or there's another one I think that's here. So I gotta pop those out, but it's the third one down, I believe. I think they're electrically equal, but I prefer to use that one. So I'm gonna pop that out. I'm going to line up the chip the same way. I'm going to plug it in. Power is de-energized right now, so I'm going to plug in the actual connections over here. And I guess I'll disassemble my printer one of these days, tonight or tomorrow. And I'm going to pop this in. Now, this process, I'm not sure how well it's going to work on this board because I've never done it on this one. Granted, I didn't do it on the last one ever before on camera or by myself. So the results might vary. So if we see smoke, it's probably because I screwed something up. So I'm going to power it up first. I don't see any smoke. There's jumpers over here that are already installed for sensorless homing. There doesn't look like a jumper for 3.3 volts that I can see, so I'm just going to connect this. And then we'll go over and we'll try this in VS Code, and this is going to be super quick. So in VS Code, I'm going to go over to my source core boards.h. I'm going to search on MKS underscore Gen L. And this is the Gen L version 2, so I need to do an underscore V2. So this looks like the board. To verify it, because it's not a 16-bit board, I'm going to copy this. I'm going to go up here and see what the chipset is. So it's at 18 mega 2560. So it's going back to the default that it once was. So I'll show you a trick for that in a second. So I'm going to go to configuration.h. I'm going to search on motherboard. I'm going to paste it right here. I'm going to try and leave the COM port the same. I'm not sure how this is going to work out because normally I used to compile this in Arduino Studios. So I'm going to leave that alone, and then I'm going to go to Platform IO. I'm going to click right here and try and Control Z back, which it allows me to do. And I'm not sure how well this is going to upload to the board, so let's try it out and see. So I'm going to click Upload. And this may take a few moments. Now it's erroring out because the previous build was a different one, so let's do a clean. And we'll do an upload again. And if there's an error, we'll try and figure it out. There's an error. So, see what's going on here. So apparently there's some kind of USB serial issue. So I'm going to see if we can connect to it with the serial monitor. Apparently it says it's okay, or at least it thinks it is. So I'm going to try build again. And I'll try build again. I might be missing a detail here having to do with the serial port. So I'm going to move it to 0. So configure. I'm going to change this to 0. And try this again. Hopefully it won't be a mess. So far it looks good. So I guess that was the fix. I guessed right, if that makes anybody happy. Let me check on the chat because I've been babbling for way too long. So you got 6 inches of snow as well. Yeah, we got it to work. Apparently, my working theory for the issue for sensorless homing is the order in which you take out the power. So it's take out the PSU power first, take out the USB power or cable second, plug in the PSU power, wait until the firmware is loaded, probably about 30 seconds to a minute, plug in the USB, and then it works. Super odd, but that's what it looks like. Preferably you want to see UART, otherwise you might be doing soldering underneath the actual stepper. And it's best to avoid it because, like myself, at home I can't solder very precisely. At work I can, but obviously I can't share my work resources with my home resources. So until I get a microscope that you can see what I'm doing, it's probably to best practice to buy the actual stepper that says UART. That way if it doesn't work, you can send it back. And that's why I prefer Amazon, only because they're very good about returns. Considering I usually return a couple of dozen times a year. So let's see what we got here. So we were talking about the build. The build loaded while I was babbling. Looks like it's okay, so I'm gonna see if we can open it in Pronterface. So inside Pronterface, we shouldn't need to power cycle, but this may be the case again, but I doubt it because it's a different architecture. So I'm gonna connect. Apparently I can't connect because VS Code probably is connected. So I'm gonna try and disconnect the power and break the connection. So I'm going to go over to the desktop. I'm going to take out the actual power. Then I'm going to take out the USB power. Then I'm going to connect the power. It's not going to load firmware because it's already loaded technically. And then I'm gonna connect this. Then I'm gonna go back to Printerface and see if I can connect to it. So one of the reasons I can't connect, you see how it says COM10? So I'll show you what's going on. So over here on my desktop, remember how I was talking about the COM ports? They like to play jokes on you. So it's now COM11. Obviously, it's a different type of chipset, so it's 11. So I guess this is a Spinal Tap version of 3D printing. So I'm going to go back over here. I'm going to change this to 11 because now it goes to 11. I'm going to click connect. It connects. Apparently it looks kind of weird. There we go. So I'm going to try homing, and if we see smoke, I've done something wrong. So the sensitivity might be slightly different. We can change that, but let's try moving 100. So 100 actually moves 100 with the last value that we did. So I think the only issue is sensitivity, and that we all know how to do for sensorless homing. So I don't know if I should do that. I don't have a lot of subject material to talk about after this, but obviously now you know why I was confused yesterday, because apparently I'm easily confused. So I'm going to check on the chat, see if you have any questions that I can answer quick. Otherwise, the places where you can actually ask me questions are in the description. I have a Discord that you can go to. And for those people that have been doing super chats that I may have missed during this, thank you very much. And for some of the people that have just decided to sign up on my Patreon account, thank you for that. I'll try and start creating material. It's been like 3 years where no one's actually utilized it. So I'll start producing material soon. But for the patrons that have signed up, thank you very much. Anybody have any other questions? Because I want to let you go tonight so I can go shovel. Okay, well, everyone take care, be safe. If you're in the weather that we're in for snow, take your time and be safe and have a nice night. Thank you all.